The crimson glow of dying stars painted the battlefield in shades of despair. Admiral Velthara clutched the command console of the Meridian's Grace, her 4 arms trembling as another hegemony dreadnought erupted in brilliant flames off their starboard bow. The once mighty coalition fleet, 200 vessels strong just hours ago, now numbered barely 30, their hulls scarred and bleeding atmosphere into the cold vacuum of space. Admiral, the stellar harmony is requesting immediate evacuation! Communications Officer Quindar's voice cracked through the chaos. Their reactor core is critical! Velthara's compound eyes swept across the tactical display, each blinking light representing thousands of souls under her command. The hegemony's obsidian vessels moved with predatory grace, their weapon arrays crackling with the same dark energy that had already consumed 3 star systems. Behind them, the massive world killer, a moon-sized construct bristling with extinction-class weaponry, drifted inexorably toward the Andorian homeworld. "Transfer all remaining fighters to escort duty," she commanded, her voice steady despite the desperation clawing at her hearts. "We hold the line, no matter the cost." Engineer Brixton looked up from his station, his scaled face etched with grim determination. "Admiral, at current depletion rates, we have perhaps 20 minutes before total system failure. The quantum drives are operating at dangerous overload levels." 20 minutes. Velthara's species measured time in cycles far longer than most others, but she had learned to think in the desperate seconds of combat. 20 minutes for 3 billion Andorians to somehow escape their doomed world. 20 minutes for the Coalition's greatest evacuation fleet to punch through an enemy blockade that had crushed their military might like insects. The bridge shuddered as another barrage hammered their shields. Warning klaxons wailed their electronic death songs while damage reports flooded in from every deck. Hull breaches in sections 7 through 12, life support failing on decks 9 and 10, the medical bay overwhelmed with casualties. "Admiral!" Tactical Officer Rinesh's voice cut through the cacophony. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures. The hegemony is preparing to fire their planet crackers." Through the main view screen, Velthara watched as the World Killer's primary weapon array began to glow with malevolent energy. She had seen the recordings from the Kepler massacre, had witnessed how those beams could strip away a planet's atmosphere, in minutes boiling oceans and turning continents to glass. "All ships maximum burn toward the enemy formation," she ordered, knowing it was futile. "If we're going to die, we die with honor." The remnants of the Coalition fleet surged forward, their engines screaming at maximum output. Fighters swooped between the larger vessels like angry hornets, their pilots knowing they flew to certain death. The hegemony forces moved to intercept, their formations shifting with mechanical precision. That's when the impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open as something massive translated out of hyperspace directly between the Coalition fleet and the World Killer. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the desperate defenders, not the remorseless hegemony forces. As they stared at the newcomer, it was unlike any vessel in their databases. Sleek yet brutal, elegant yet terrifying, it stretched nearly 2 kilometers. From bow to stern. Its hull bore scars that spoke of countless battles, and its weapon ports glowed with an energy signature that made their sensors scream warnings. "Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Velthara of the Coalition Defense Force. Identify yourself immediately." The response came in a voice that carried the weight of steel and starfire. "This is Captain Kethamiran Shadowvault of the Terran vessel Prometheus Unleashed. We received your distress call. Apologies for the delay. We came as fast as we could." Velthara's breath caught. Humans, the mythical Terrans, whose very existence was debated in academic circles across the galaxy. They were real, and they had come to fight. Captain Kethamiran Shadowvault stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Unleashed, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as tactical data flooded the displays around him. The Coalition fleet hung in space like wounded birds, their formation shattered, their hope all but extinguished. Beyond them, the hegemony's dark armada prepared to deliver the killing blow. "Weapon status, Commander Torvik?" he asked, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had stared death in the face more times than he cared to count. "All systems green, Captain," replied his tactical officer, a woman whose cybernetic implants glowed blue against her pale skin. "The hegemony vessels are registering as priority alpha threats. Recommend immediate engagement. Navigator Zenkai, position us between the Coalition fleet and that world killer. Engineering, I want everything the reactor can give us." Chief Engineer Draxam's voice crackled over the comm from deep within the ship's bowels. "Aye, Captain. Fusion cores are singing and the antimatter reserves are at full capacity. We're ready to dance with the devil himself." The Prometheus Unleashed surged forward, its gravitic drives bending space around its hull. The human vessel moved with a predatory grace that made the Coalition survivors collectively hold their breath. This was no merchant vessel or exploration craft. This was a weapon of war forged in the fires of humanity's darkest conflicts. "Incoming transmission from the hegemony world killer," communications officer Lyra Neth reported, her tone tight with barely controlled fear. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, revealing a creature that existed beyond most species' nightmares. The hegemony overseer's form was a writhing mass of shadow and metal, its voice a harmonic convergence of screams and static. Unknown. "Vessel, you have 30 seconds to withdraw or be annihilated. The Coalition worlds are condemned for their defiance. Nothing can prevent their extinction." Keth Mirren smiled, a cold, predatory expression that would have made veteran warriors reconsider their life choices. "Overseer, this is Captain Shadowvault of the Terran Commonwealth Navy. I have a counter-proposal. Surrender now, and I might let some of your ships limp home." The Overseer's form writhed with what might have been amusement. "Humans, the galaxy speaks of you in whispers and myths. You will learn why entire star systems flee before the hegemony's might. We'll see about that." Keth Moran cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "All hands, battle stations, target the World Killer's primary weapon array. Time to show these bastards what happens when you threaten the innocent." The Prometheus Unleashed opened fire. Twin lances of coherent antimatter erupted from the ship's main guns, crossing the void in milliseconds to impact the World Killer's charging weapon systems. The explosions lit up space like newborn stars, and for the first time in the battle, the massive hegemony construct shuddered under enemy fire. "Direct hit!" Torvik shouted over the bridge's celebration. "Their planet cracker array is offline." But the hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Dozens of their vessels turned toward the human ship, their dark energy weapons painting deadly rainbows across the void. The Coalition fleet watched in awe and terror as the Prometheus Unleashed danced between the incoming fire, its defensive systems creating a light show that rivaled the local star. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire from multiple vectors," reported. "Damage control, Chief Nixara. Shields holding at 70%, but they're throwing everything they have at us." Keth Mirren's hands moved across his command console with practiced precision. "Release the fighters, all wings, clear engagement pattern Omega. Show them what human pilots can do." Launch bays opened along the Prometheus Unleashed's hull, disgorging dozens of sleek fighter craft that moved like silver bullets through space. The human pilots flew with a reckless abandon that both terrified and inspired the Coalition observers, weaving through weapons fire that should have been impossible to survive. Admiral Velthara watched from her damaged bridge as the single human vessel engaged an entire fleet. "By the ancient stars," she whispered, "they're actually pushing them back." The tide of battle began to shift as the human fighters carved through the hegemony formations with brutal efficiency. These weren't the measured tactics of the coalition forces. This was warfare elevated to an art form, conducted by a species that had learned to fight among the stars while others still squabbled over continents. Deep within the Prometheus Unleashed's tactical center, Captain Shadowvault monitored the battle's progression with cold calculation. His ship had managed to cripple the World Killer's primary weapons, but the hegemony fleet still outnumbered them 50-1. Even human ingenuity had its limits. "Captain," Navigator Zenkai called out, her voice tight with concentration. "I'm reading massive hyperspace distortions approaching our position. Multiple contacts, designation unknown." Keth Mirren allowed himself a grim smile. "Right on schedule! Open fleet communications!" Space around the battlefield suddenly erupted. With new arrivals, not one or two ships, but dozens, an entire human battle fleet materializing from the depths of hyperspace like vengeful gods. Each vessel bore the same scarred elegance as the Prometheus Unleashed, their hulls telling stories of countless battles fought in defense of the innocent. Admiral Velthara felt her heart skip as she recognized the largest of the newcomers. Massive dreadnought whose very presence seemed to bend reality around it. What is that monstrosity?" she breathed. "That," Keth Moran's voice carried across all coalition frequencies, "is the TNS Ragnarok's Dawn, flagship of the Terran Expeditionary Force, Fleet Admiral Vaxarian commanding." The communications array crackled to life as a new voice joined. The battle, deeper, more resonant, carrying the authority of someone who had orchestrated victories across multiple galactic sectors. "Captain Shadowvault, this is Admiral Vaxarian. Status report." "Good to hear your voice, Admiral. We've got approximately 3 billion civilians in need of immediate evacuation, 1 hegemony world killer with damaged primary weapons, and about 40 enemy vessels looking for a fight." "Understood. All ships, implement Battle Protocol Crimson. We're ending this here and now." The human fleet moved with a coordination that defied belief. Where the coalition had fought desperately and the hegemony had relied on overwhelming force, the humans demonstrated something far more dangerous: perfect unity of purpose, backed by centuries of warfare among the stars. Battleship's Iron Testament and Void's Revenge flanked the World Killer, their massive kinetic artillery sending tungsten slugs the size of shuttlecraft slamming into the construct's hull. Destroyer squadrons, led by the Storm's Embrace, carved through the hegemony screening forces like sharks through a school of fish. The hegemony overseer's form writhed with increasing agitation as his carefully orchestrated attack dissolved into chaos. "Impossible! No single species possesses such military capability." Admiral Vaxarian's response came from the bridge of the Ragnarok's Dawn, his scarred face displaying the patience of a predator that had already won. "You made one crucial mistake, Overseer. You assumed we were just another single species." "What do you mean?" the alien demanded. "Humans don't fight alone. We never have. Watch and learn." The true scope of the human response began to reveal itself as the battle continued. The crews weren't purely human. They included beings from dozens of species, all united under the banner of the Terran Commonwealth. Former enemies who had become allies, refugees who had found new homes, explorers who had discovered that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their individual capability, but their ability to forge unbreakable bonds with anyone willing to stand against the darkness. Engineer Draxim, whose chitinous exoskeleton marked him as one of the insectoid Kithara, worked alongside human technicians to keep the Prometheus Unleashed's weapon systems online. Navigation Officer Zenkai, her crystalline features identifying her as a refugee from the silicon-based Prism Collective, plotted intercept courses with the same precision that had once mapped trade routes between distant nebulae. This wasn't conquest. This was liberation. This wasn't genocide. This was justice. Commander Torvik's tactical display showed the battle's progression as the hegemony forces found themselves systematically dismantled. Their dark energy weapons, so effective against coalition vessels, seemed almost crude when faced with human defensive technologies that had been perfected through conflicts with dozens of hostile species. "Captain, the Coalition fleet is requesting assistance with their wounded," Communications Officer Lyraneth reported. "Tell them our medical frigates are already en route. Dr. Miranda will have them patched up in no time." The tide had turned completely. Where moments before the Coalition had faced certain extinction, they now watched as humanity's children, biological and adopted alike, demonstrated why the galaxy's greatest threats whispered warnings about the species that turned enemies, into family and warfare, into an expression of protective love. The hegemony world killer shuddered under the combined assault of the human battle fleet, its obsidian hull cracking like an eggshell under the relentless barrage. Admiral Vaxyarian observed the destruction from the bridge of the Ragnarok's dawn, his cybernetic eye tracking multiple tactical streams simultaneously. "Target their central processing nexus," he commanded. "If we can sever the Overseer's control over the remaining fleet, they'll scatter like leaves in a storm." Captain Kethmarin's voice cut through the comm static. "Admiral, my tactical team has identified a weakness in their quantum shielding matrix. If we can coordinate a focused assault on their primary power core, we can trigger a cascade failure." "Acknowledged, Captain. All vessels prepare for synchronized strike. We end this now." The hegemony overseer's panic was becoming evident as his carefully planned genocide transformed into a rout. His remaining forces, once numbering in the hundreds, had been reduced to barely 24 vessels, most of them damaged and bleeding crew into the void. "You cannot comprehend what you have unleashed," the creature screamed across all frequencies. "The hegemony spans 10,000 worlds. Our armies are infinite. You have doomed this entire sector." Admiral Vaxarian's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We've faced infinite armies before, Overseer. We're still here. You won't be." The coordinated strike was a thing of deadly beauty. 37 human vessels focused their fire on a single point, a section of the world killer's hull no larger than a fighter craft, but critical to the construct's operation. Antimatter torpedoes, plasma cannons, kinetic impactors, and exotic energy weapons all converged in a display that briefly outshone the system's star. The result was catastrophic for the hegemony. The world killer's central core erupted in a chain reaction that tore through the massive vessel like wildfire. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull as system after system failed, and the moon-sized construct began breaking apart. "All hegemony vessels, this is your final warning," Admiral Vaxarian broadcast. "Surrender now or share your world killer's fate." The response was immediate and predictable. The remaining hegemony ships opened their hyperspace drives and fled, abandoning their positions without a moment's hesitation. Within minutes, the space around the Andorian homeworld was clear of enemy vessels. Admiral Velthera found herself staring at tactical displays that showed impossible readings. An entire hegemony battle fleet, the same force that had crushed the Coalition's finest ships like toys, had been routed by a species that officially didn't exist. "Captain Shadowvault," she transmitted, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and gratitude. "The Coalition owes you a debt that can never be repaid. How do we even begin to thank you?" "No thanks necessary, Admiral. We've all been where you are, facing extinction, watching our worlds burn, believing that hope was just a cruel joke the universe played on the desperate. The only payment we ask is that you remember this day, and that when you encounter others in need, you do what you can to help them." Medical frigates from the human fleet were already moving between the damaged Coalition vessels, their crews working with practiced efficiency to save lives and repair critical systems. The sight of human doctors, many of them bearing the features of species that had once been enemies, working alongside Coalition medics was perhaps more remarkable than the battle itself. Engineer Brixton looked up from his damage reports, his scaled face showing confusion and wonder. "Admiral, our sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the human medical ships. They're They're not just treating wounds. They're actually regenerating damaged tissue at the cellular level. Some of our people who were minutes from death are now showing vital signs we've never recorded. Velthara nodded slowly. Everything about these humans defied explanation. Their technology, their tactics, their very existence seemed to exist outside the known laws of galactic civilization. But perhaps most remarkable was their motivation. They had crossed impossible distances, risked their lives, and expended vast resources not for conquest or glory, but simply because someone had called for help. Captain Shadowvault, if I may, ask, how did you even receive our distress call? Our long-range communications were completely severed by the hegemony's jamming. The human captain's response carried a note of something that might have been sadness. We have people throughout the galaxy, Admiral. Observers, volunteers, former refugees who have found new homes but never forgotten where they came from. When the hegemony moves against innocent worlds, we know about it. And when we know about it, we respond. The full implications of that statement were staggering. The humans hadn't just happened upon this battle. They had a network spanning the galaxy, dedicated to protecting species that couldn't protect themselves. They were the guardians that every civilization dreamed of, but never expected to find. 3 hours after the battle's end, Admiral Velthara found herself aboard the Prometheus Unleashed, walking corridors that hummed with technologies she couldn't begin to understand. Captain Shadowvault had invited the Coalition command staff for what he called a debriefing, but Velthara suspected there was more to this meeting than simple military courtesy. The conference room was a study in elegant functionality, its walls displaying star charts that seemed to shift and move of their own accord. Around the table sat beings from at least a dozen different species, all wearing the insignia of the Terran Commonwealth Navy. The diversity was breathtaking and terrifying in its implications. "Please be seated," Captain Shadowvault gestured, to chairs that automatically adjusted to accommodate each species' unique physiology. "I know you have questions. We're here to answer what we can." Admiral Velthara settled into her chair, her 4 arms folding in a gesture of respectful attention. "Captain, I must ask the obvious question. Why haven't we heard of the Terran Commonwealth before today? Your fleet capabilities suggest a civilization that should be one of the galaxy's major powers." It was Admiral Vaxarian who answered, his scarred face bearing the weight of countless difficult decisions. "Because we learned long ago that the galaxy fears what it doesn't understand. Humans have a tendency to upset established orders, to ask uncomfortable questions, to refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. We've found it's easier to work from the shadows, helping where we can, than to become embroiled in the politics of galactic civilization." Engineer Brixton leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. "Your medical technology alone should have revolutionized galactic healthcare. We've seen your doctors restore organs that were completely destroyed, regrow limbs that had been severed for hours. Why keep such miracles secret?" Dr. Miranda, a being whose avian features marked her as one of the Skyborn collective, spoke with the gentle authority of someone who had spent centuries healing the wounded. "Because miracles, when hoarded by the powerful, become instruments of oppression. We learned that lesson during the Proxima Wars, when our early medical technologies were weaponized by various factions. Now we share our knowledge freely, but only with those who prove they'll use it to help others." The conversation continued for hours, revealing glimpses of a civilization that operated on principles most galactic powers would consider dangerously naive. The humans and their allies didn't seek territory or resources. They sought connection, understanding, the opportunity to lift others up rather than climb over them. "There is something else," Captain Shadowvault said, as the formal discussion wound down. "The hegemony fleet that attacked you wasn't their main force. Our intelligence suggests they're massing for something much larger, a coordinated assault on the galactic core worlds. Millions of species, trillions of lives at risk. Admiral Vel Thara felt her blood chill. The core worlds. But that would mean total galactic domination, yes. The hegemony has learned from their failures. They're no longer content with conquering individual systems. They want to break the back of interstellar civilization itself. The implications were staggering. The core worlds represented the cultural and economic heart of galactic civilization. Their fall would trigger a cascade of societal collapse that could reduce thousands of advanced species to pre-spaceflight barbarism. What do you propose? Vel Thara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Admiral Vax Arian activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy in all its spiral-armed glory. Red indicators marked hegemony-controlled territories, while blue represented free worlds. The pattern was unmistakable. The hegemony forces were positioned for a coordinated assault that would strike at a dozen core worlds simultaneously. "We propose an alliance," he said simply. "Not a formal treaty with endless negotiations and bureaucratic delays, but a working partnership between those willing to fight for the galaxy's freedom. The coalition has proven they're willing to die for their principles. We're offering you the chance to live for them instead." The offer was unprecedented. The Terran Commonwealth, with its mysterious technologies and vast resources, was proposing to share their capabilities with the coalition, not as conquerors or patrons, but as equals united in common cause. "What would you ask of us in return?" Vel Thara inquired, her diplomatic training warring with her growing excitement. Captain Shadowvault smiled, the same cold expression that had terrified the hegemony overseer, but somehow warmer when directed at friends. "Simple. Help us save everyone else. Help us prove that the galaxy doesn't have to live in fear, that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that hope is more powerful than despair." Around the table, coalition officers exchanged glances filled with possibilities they had never dared. Imagine, an alliance with the humans wouldn't just mean survival, it would mean transformation, the chance to become something greater than they had ever dreamed possible. The meeting ended with handshakes that would reshape galactic history. As the coalition delegation prepared to return to their ships, they carried with them more than just military intelligence and technological specifications. They carried hope itself, reborn from the ashes of their darkest hour. 6 months after the Battle of Andoria, the galaxy had begun to change in ways that defied all political projections. Admiral Vel Thara stood on the observation deck of the new Coalition Commonwealth Joint Facility, orbiting Kepler Prime, watching construction crews from 40 different species work together to build something that had never existed before, a truly unified defense fleet. The transformation had been remarkable. Coalition shipyards, upgraded with human technology and managed by crews that included beings from across the galaxy, were producing vessels that combined the best elements of dozens of different technological traditions. The new ships weren't purely human, nor were they traditional coalition designs. They were something entirely new, symbols of cooperation that had once seemed impossible. "Impressive, isn't it?" Captain Shadowvault's voice carried a note of pride as he joined her at the viewport. "6 months ago, your people and mine were strangers. Now look at them work." Below them, a massive dreadnought was taking shape, the first of what would become known as the Unity-class vessels. Its hull bore the scars of intentional design rather than battle damage, each mark telling the story of a species that had contributed to its construction. Andorian crystal matrices powered its shields, human antimatter drives provided propulsion, and Kitharan computational cores managed its tactical systems. "The integration has exceeded our most optimistic projections," Vel Thara admitted. "Though, I confess, I sometimes worry we're moving too fast. Change this rapid makes some of our political leaders nervous." "Change always makes politicians nervous," Shadowvault replied with a smile. but our intelligence indicates the hegemony is accelerating their timetable. Whatever they're planning for the core worlds, it's happening sooner than we initially projected. The tactical briefing that followed confirmed their worst fears. Admiral Vaxarian's holographic image flickered to life in the conference room, his expression grim as he delivered the latest intelligence reports. Our deep space observation posts have detected massive fleet movements in the hegemony sectors. They're not just massing for a single assault, they're preparing to strike at 17 different core worlds simultaneously. If they succeed, the economic and cultural shock will cripple interstellar civilization for generations. The scale of the threat was almost incomprehensible. 17 worlds, each hosting billions of beings from hundreds of different species. The hegemony wasn't planning conquest. They were planning extinction, the systematic elimination of everything that made galactic civilization possible. "What's their timeline?" asked Coalition General Rick Sander, his crystalline features reflecting the briefing room's lighting in prismatic patterns. "Our best estimates suggest they'll begin their assault within the next 2 months. Their forces are already moving into position, using stealth technologies that make detection difficult even for our most advanced sensors." Admiral Vel Thara studied the tactical displays with growing concern. "Our fleet modernization program won't be complete for another year. Even with human assistance, we can't match their numbers." "Numbers won't decide this battle," Admiral Vaxarian replied. "Intelligence will. Strategy will. And most importantly, unity will. The hegemony's greatest weakness has always been their inability to understand cooperation. They see only dominance and submission, conquest and defeat. They can't comprehend species working together as equals." Captain Shadowvault activated a secondary display showing deployment patterns across the galaxy. "We've been busy these past 6 months. The Commonwealth has deep cover operatives embedded throughout hegemony space, including several who have managed to penetrate their command structure. When they move, we'll know about it. When they attack, we'll be ready." The revelation that humans had managed to infiltrate the hegemony, a feat that most galactic powers considered impossible, sent shockwaves through the coalition leadership. The implications were staggering. If the humans could predict hegemony movements, they could potentially turn the enemy's own tactics against them. "There's something else," Admiral Vaxarian continued. "Our operatives have discovered the true purpose of the hegemony's campaign. They're not just seeking conquest, they're looking for something specific, something they believe is hidden in the core worlds." "What kind of something?" General Rick Sander asked. "We're not entirely certain, but our best intelligence suggests it's related to an ancient artifact, something predating most current galactic civilizations. The hegemony believes this artifact will give them power over space and time itself." The meeting continued deep into the night as strategists from a dozen species worked to develop countermeasures for an enemy that seemed to hold all the advantages. But gradually, a plan began to emerge. Not just a strategy for defense, but a blueprint for victory that would require everything the Coalition and Commonwealth had learned about cooperation. The hegemony was about to discover that they had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that fear was the galaxy's dominant force, that in the face of overwhelming power, even the bravest souls would eventually submit. They had never encountered a species like humanity, a race that grew stronger in the face of impossible odds, that forged alliances from the ashes of defeat, that turned desperation into determination. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. The storm was gathering, and at its heart stood beings who had chosen hope over fear, unity over division, and sacrifice over submission. The battle of the core worlds began not with the thunder of weapons, but with silence, the eerie quiet that preceded the greatest military engagement in galactic history. Admiral Velthera stood on the bridge of the newly christened Unity's Promise, the first of the Coalition Commonwealth hybrid dreadnoughts, watching as 17 different hegemony fleets materialized simultaneously around the core worlds. All stations report ready, Commander Torvik announced from her position at the tactical console. The human officer had become Velthara's most trusted advisor over the past months, their species differences bridged by shared purpose and mutual respect. Fleet Admiral Vax Arian signals all forces are in position, Communications Officer Quindar reported. Operation Sunrise is go. The plan was audacious in its complexity and beautiful in its simplicity. Rather than meeting the hegemony's numerical superiority head-on, the Coalition Commonwealth Alliance would strike at the heart of their enemy's greatest weakness, their inability to function without centralized control. Captain Shadowvault's voice crackled across the fleet communications. All units, remember, we're not just fighting for the core worlds. We're fighting for the idea that no species should live in fear, that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that hope can triumph over despair. Today, we prove that the galaxy belongs to all of us. The first phase began with surgical precision. Human stealth ships, invisible to hegemony sensors, had been positioned throughout enemy formations for weeks. At Admiral Vaxarian's signal, they simultaneously struck at the command vessels of each hegemony fleet, their exotic weapons severing communication links and disrupting coordination protocols. Phase 1 complete, reported Engineer Brixton, his scaled hands dancing over tactical displays. Hegemony fleets are operating independently. Their coordination matrix is shattered. But the hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Deprived of centralized command, the individual fleet commanders fell back on their species' most basic instinct, overwhelming violence. Thousands of dark energy beams lanced across space, targeting everything that moved. Several core worlds' orbital installations erupted in brilliant flames as the enemy's fury was unleashed without strategic focus. Phase 2, all units execute, Admiral Velthara commanded. This was where the true genius of the Alliance revealed itself. The Coalition Commonwealth fleet didn't attack as a single massive force. Instead, they fragmented into hundreds of smaller units, each composed of vessels from multiple species working in perfect harmony. Where the hegemony saw chaos and weakness, the Allies demonstrated the power of coordinated diversity. The Unity's promise led Strike Group Delta through a formation of hegemony heavy cruisers, its hybrid weapons systems creating havoc among enemy ranks. Andorian crystal arrays focused human antimatter streams into coherent beams that could punch through any known shielding, while Kitharan tactical computers predicted enemy movements with inhuman precision. Target the World Killer approaching Nexus Prime, Admiral Velthara ordered. All weapons, maximum yield. The massive hegemony construct, even larger than the one destroyed at Andoria, turned its planet-cracking weapons toward the cultural heart of galactic civilization. But it never got the chance to fire. The combined firepower of 3 Unity-class dreadnoughts struck its primary weapon array in perfect synchronization, the explosion visible from 3 star systems away. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as the Alliance's superior coordination overwhelmed hegemony numerical advantages. Human fighters, piloted by beings from 40 different species, wove through enemy formations like silver ghosts. Coalition capital ships, upgraded with Commonwealth technology, demonstrated that defensive unity was stronger than offensive aggression. The tide turned decisively when Admiral Vaxarian implemented the plan's final phase. Deep within hegemony, space, Commonwealth operatives who had spent years establishing their cover activated simultaneously, not as saboteurs or spies, but as liberators, revealing to enslaved populations throughout the hegemony territories that resistance was possible, that help had arrived, that freedom was within reach. Admiral! Communications Officer Quindar's voice carried barely contained excitement. We're receiving surrender transmissions from hegemony forces throughout the galaxy. Their slave worlds are in open revolt. The hegemony overseer's final transmission was a study in defeated rage. This is impossible, Order cannot be defeated by chaos. Unity cannot triumph over dominion. Fleet Admiral Vaxarian's response would be remembered for generations. You never understood, Overseer. What you called chaos, we call diversity. What you called weakness, we call compassion. What you called impossible, we call Tuesday. The battle's end came not with the destruction of the enemy, but with their transformation. Hegemony vessels across the galaxy began broadcasting surrender codes as their crews, many of them enslaved species forced into service, realized they could choose freedom over fear. The vast empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries crumbled not under military might, but under the radical idea that all beings deserved dignity, respect, and the chance to determine their own destiny. In the aftermath, as rescue ships from 100 different species worked together to heal the wounded and rebuild the damaged, Admiral Velthara found herself once again aboard the Prometheus Unleashed. Captain Shadowvault stood at his familiar position by the observation deck, watching the galaxy's rebirth with quiet satisfaction. "What happens now?" she asked. "The hegemony is broken. Their territories are free. But what comes next?" Shadowvault smiled. Not the cold expression of a warrior, but the warm grin of someone who had witnessed miracles become reality. "Now we do the hardest thing of all. We prove that peace is more difficult than war, that building is harder than destroying, that hope requires more courage than despair, and if we fail, then we'll have others to help us try again. That's what family does." As Velthara looked out at the mixed fleets of former enemies working together to heal a wounded galaxy, she realized that the humans had given them something more precious than victory. They had given them each other, proof that the universe was vast enough for everyone, diverse enough to celebrate all differences, and hopeful enough to believe that tomorrow could always be better than today. The galaxy would remember this day not as the end of the hegemony, but as the beginning of something unprecedented, a civilization built not on conquest or dominion, but on the radical idea that every species, every individual, every dream mattered. They had believed all hope was lost, until a human warship roared out of the void and taught them that hope was just another word for refusing to give up on each other. In the years that followed, children across 1,000 worlds would learn the story of the day the galaxy learned to dream again. And in those dreams there would always be room for one more friend, one more ally, one more voice in the eternal song of species choosing to build rather than destroy, to unite rather than divide, to hope rather than despair. The darkness had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by the simple, radical belief that everyone deserved a chance to see the dawn. They believed all hope was lost, until a human warship roared out of the void.